Hey everyone, I'm Gabby Isabel and I help out with virtual media with the Atlanta Steampunk Exposition. As part of Women's History Month, we're really excited to present to you tonight Tea and Arsenic, Badass Women Throughout History. Helping me with this discussion tonight are some of the biggest badasses in the convention and academic community. First up, we've got popular steampunk figure and designer Aleta Pardalis. We've got costumer and presenter Andi La-Rosa Jimenez. We've got forensic anthropologist and costumer Emily Finke, art historian Jean Chapman, and mixologist with Calamity Labs and presenter Sara Camarata, also known as Calamity Dawn. Welcome, everybody. So, as today's topic is tea and arsenic, we figured we would start it off with a cocktail named after or mixed after a famous lady. So I would like to talk to you about the White Lady cocktail. Now, the White Lady cocktail was invented at the turn of the 20th century, and it's said that it got its name because the mixologist who created it saw from across the crowded bar room in London Zelda Fitzgerald, who was a platinum blonde and very well known for having a body, brash, and playful personality. So he named this cocktail the White Lady based off of her. As you can see in the video, it is a gin-based drink, which was very popular with both Zelda and her husband. It also has Cointreau, a little lemon juice, some simple syrup, and an egg white. And the egg white gives it a little bit of a froth. So what I've used today is an organic, fresh egg white. You want to add all of your ingredients to the chilled mixer. You're going to shake it without ice for about a minute, because that's going to help the egg to form a bit of a froth. It's going to give you the body that you want for the cocktail. And then after about a minute, then you add in the ice and you shake it a little bit longer. This was actually a really fun drink to experiment with and to try for the very first time for me. I'd never actually had one before. And it does come out a little creamy. You can leave out the egg white if that's something that bothers you. It really just adds a little bit more depth to the texture, but it doesn't affect the flavor at all. So you serve it in a coupe glass with a little bit of a lemon twist, and it's a very light, very refreshing, very old-fashioned kind of drink. And it definitely harkens back to that era of the Lost Generation with the Fitzgeralds and Hemingway and all of the other famous artists and partiers back at the turn of the century. I think a lot of people don't realize how much of an influence Zelda had on F. Scott's career. In fact, they do say that a lot of the most famous excerpts from F. Scott's greatest works were actually written by Zelda. And slightly plagiarized because, of course, back then it was easier to get published when you were a man. So Zelda Fitzgerald is a very interesting topic for me. She actually died here where I live in Asheville, North Carolina. So every March they have Zelda Fitzgerald Week, where they present panels and talks based off of her life as an artist, as a writer, and as a woman at the turn of the century. So now that we have our drinks, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So we got a little tea, we got a little arsenic. Now we've got all of our badass ladies on screen. Thank you guys for coming and chatting with us tonight. Who has a badass that they'd like to talk about first?
Well, I have one. So this person, she was born as Hedwig Kiesler in 1914 in Vienna, Austria, to a Jewish family there. Led a very interesting life. So her first marriage, she ended up marrying this munitions manufacturer who was in league with the Nazis. So, I mean, dinner parties with all these people and Mussolini, and she was not happy. The story goes that she dressed up as a maid, sewed all her, like a bunch of jewels into a jacket or into a coat, and rode away in the middle of the night on a bicycle to escape because he was jealous and watching her. She was being watched all the time, and even like phone calls being monitored. So she snuck away, escaped to London, and from London then went, she did go to the US. Now, eventually, invention-wise, her and a composer, she came up with the idea, and apparently he helped create like the practical model of this. It was a frequency hopping technology. And that was given to the Navy back in World War II, for the whole idea being this guided missile system that wouldn't be able to be hacked because of the frequency hop. Okay. Now, unfortunately, the Navy did not use that technology in World War II, and they sat on the patent. And before the patent actually expired, unbeknownst to her, they gave the patent to somebody to work with, and they created a buoy system and all this stuff. Now, that technology is now considered to be worth around $30 billion. Wow. And she never saw a penny of it. Oh. Because of the way that this was all handled. Apparently with patent laws, you have to file within 6 years. You have to, like, if you're gonna sue because they didn't pay you, you had to do that within 6 years. Well, she didn't know that they had ever used it. So she never saw a penny of the technology that eventually became the basis for Wi-Fi, cell phones, Bluetooth, like pretty much everything we use in modern life, hence it being worth $30 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, she was not known by her birth name.
I've never heard of this person.
Right. So she ended up being an actress, and that's what she became known for. So she went by the stage name Hedy Lamarr and was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. Unfortunately for that era, women could either be beautiful or they could be smart, but they were not allowed to be both. Right. And basically all they cared about was her beauty. And yeah, she, over the years, I mean, she tried to buck the system. She produced some of her own films, which was a huge no-no for Hollywood. They really were not happy about that.
Yeah.
To the point that one of them that she did, like, she couldn't even find distribution in the US for. So yeah, I mean, she really tried, but unfortunately in that era, you know, it was one of those where they didn't like stars in the studio system, whether male or female, actually doing anything beyond acting. Like, they did not want them to be directors, producers, and then on top of being a woman.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I knew some of that. I'm a big fan of Hedy Lamarr, and I know that after her initial burst in show business, that she continued to create her own roles. But, you know, times being what they were, there wasn't much of a market for that with the studios. So yeah, that's pretty amazing though about sewing all the jewels into her clothes when she escaped. That's incredible. Like, heck yeah. Wow.
She had something like my great grandmother.
Yeah.
Escaped from Austria about 10 years before she did.
Oh wow.
Now, did she ever live to see the dawn of the computer era? I don't know when she died. Did she die before?
Oh wow.
She actually lived quite a long time, but yeah, I mean,
For her.
near the end of her life, she was a shut-in. She didn't go out and engage in the public eye, so a lot of people didn't even know that she was still around.
Well, and of course, sadly, being a victim of the studio system, that era, it was sadly common for them to give their stars methamphetamines and, you know, uppers, downers. So they got them addicted to drugs. And then she ended up Dr. Feelgood. Mm-hmm. She ended up being one of his patients, and what he would tell them that it was vitamin B supplements, but in reality it was meth.
Oh gosh.
So she, for years, was being injected with meth without knowing it. Yeah.
Wow. Hopefully she got to see some of her ideas come to pass. I know that it wasn't, you know, that it's not ideal and she had an unhappy end, but hopefully she got to see something, you know, she got to see something from people.
I mean, she was an incredibly resilient woman, you know. I mean, even though she never got the credit for her inventions, you know, she never stopped fighting. She had that like spirit, you know, like it reminds me of my mom because my mom would brawl with anyone. There's a popular carnival attraction in San Francisco. It's one of those mechanical arm wrestlers. And my mom, like every time we visited San Francisco, put a couple quarters in and arm wrestled the mechanical, the machine, and would win most of the So, you know, I mean, that generation, they really truly were badasses, not just, you know, I mean, to be so well known for your beauty, but to also be so intelligent and just so have that spirit, you know, like they're not just gonna accept the status quo. That's awesome.
Well, being that she was around until 2000. So she lived to see a lot of that all come to pass. And toward the end of her life, they gave her an award, not money, but they gave her an award. It's like, here, look, we're acknowledging this. And you're like, well, that's nice. Where's the money?
Right.
Never got the money.
Yeah.
Well, better than nothing, I guess. But
Yeah.
Thanks for the award.
And just the fact that we are all sitting here in various corners of the world and we're able to see each other and talk to each other in real time. I mean, that none of that would be possible without the building blocks that she put down. And that's very incredible. You know, I mean, I know we're all looking forward to safer times, to vaccines and everything coming into place so that we can all hang out and hug each other again. But like, you know, I'm getting to see folks I haven't seen their faces in years, and it's super exciting just to say hi to everybody. So,
all thanks to Hedwig. So cheers to her.
All thanks to Hedwig. Hell yeah. That's awesome. So, Andi, I hear that you also have a badass to share with us.
Yes, actually, the work that the badass that I'm going to be talking about is goes back a little bit about 80 years from Hedwig's era, but in real life, I'm a computer programmer, I'm a web developer. So this person is somebody who holds a special place in my heart. She's popularly known as Ada Lovelace, and she is popularly considered to be the world's first computer programmer. Yep. What that means is, that has some qualifiers to it, right? Because she was born in 1815 in London, and she was the only child of Lord and Lady Byron. Lord Byron, as we know, is the very popular.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yep. She was named after Lord Byron's half-sister, his favorite sister, Augusta. That was actually her name. Ada is the nickname that Lord Byron gave to her. Her name was actually Augusta. And she was born Augusta Byron in 1815. And she was the only child born to Lord Byron and his wife, Lady Byron. As many people know, Lord Byron had about 15 other kids with 15 other women, including his own half-sister who he met when they were adults. So that's weird. So theirs was not, we could safely assume, was not a happy marriage. She was not born into a happy marriage. She was born into a very wealthy family. Both her parents came from a lot of money, and Lord Byron was very successful in his time and what have you. And he had a lot of very rich friends, and so they were not happy when she was born. I think that they first separated when Ada was 5 weeks old. So pretty much from the get-go, she didn't have a whole lot to do with her father. Her father died in Paris with a mistress when she was 8. So she didn't know her father, her famous father, very well. In fact, that was by design. Her mother, understandably, was very bitter about the situation because after he passed away, these other kids, half siblings of Ada would pop out of the woodwork throughout her entire life. And so right up to her death almost, she discovered a half sister, right before, a couple of years before she passed away. So it was her entire life, she was just discovering new siblings. So her mother did not want her to follow in her father's footsteps. So she really steered Ada into following, what we know now as the STEM careers. She wanted her to be a mathematician, and she wanted her to do the natural sciences. That was an era where a lot of naturalists were becoming very, popular in popular culture. So she was very into science, and she was very into, she was very early on as a teenager, her gifts in mathematics started emerging. She had private tutors, and she had, a lot of privileges that a lot of women her age in the early 1800s didn't have. But she also had a mother who was yes, what you should definitely not do is be a poet, because that makes people crazy and have 15 other kids all over the world. So you should math sounds good. Math sounds awesome. So she was very, very heavily steered into the left brain careers. However, having said that, her whole life she did consider her interest in math and science to be what she called poetical science. So science and math being these very cold, detached subjects that had just theoretical applications. She was her entire life very, very interested in the collaboration between humans and technology, and the way that ethics should play into, morals should play into the application of technology, which is still a conversation that we're still having in 2021. Yeah. So she was a very, very much ahead of her time in many ways. But because she was very wealthy, and because she was really, really intelligent, and she was super into math and science, which was not something, she became kind of well known for that in London intellectual circles. And she became friends with a lot of very famous intellectuals of her time. She was friends with Charles Dickens. And one person she became really close friends with was Charles Babbage, who was the father of computers, right? So he's the person that invented the first working computer. So he invented, he was working for many, many years on this machine that he called the analytic engine, which is pretty much the first general purpose computer that was ever invented. So it wasn't like what we know now, like the laptops that we're all, using to work with. It was enormous. It literally took up an entire room, and it didn't work with like hard drives or electricity. It worked with punch cards. And so it was very, very complex. And it took him years and years and years. And he never was able to build it because, I mean, the costs of doing so were astronomical. And so he just never got it built. But he worked at it. It was a very theoretical, almost a thought experiment that he was working on. And he became very well known in the realm of math and science because people immediately, this was, you know, the early Victorian era, you know, people immediately started seeing the applications of crunching numbers automatically. You know, this was the industrial era. The people immediately started seeing, you know, the capitalist applications of these things. And so he became pen pals with Ada. And during this time, she did marry a baron, William King, so she became Ada King, but he was the Baron of Lovelace, so she became the Countess of Lovelace, and that's why she's known as Ada Lovelace. And she had 3 kids. The first one she had actually was quite young, and was a daughter. She was very, very close to her. She also encouraged her daughter, who was also named Augusta, to follow her passion in science. But yeah, so essentially Charles Babbage was working on this analytic engine. And so it was a subject of much discussion there were scientific societies at the time throughout all of Europe that would gather and just chit chat about the latest news in math and science. And the analytic engine was topic of much, much discussion. And one huge symposium in Italy took place that covered a lot of like what we have. Basically, it was a convention. It was basically a con about science in Italy. And so this one particular Italian mathematician started looking at the ways that Charles Babbage was talking about feeding information into his machine. And he wrote this like essay kind of formulating about whether or not you know, how to input information, essentially, how to input information and get information out of this machine in an accessible way that you wouldn't have to have all this incredibly specialized knowledge. And it was a very short paper. It was maybe 4 or 5 pages long. And so it was translated into French. It was translated into a few languages, and Ada got a hold of it. And so she agreed to translate it into English for Charles, because Charles was not a multilingual person, for Charles Babbage. And when she was translating it, she wrote elaborate notes. Like her notes were 3 times longer than the paper that this Italian mathematician had written. Like her notes were almost, and they were, from that, they had this incredibly crystal clear vision of how to input this machine algorithm that it only existed on paper at the time. So it was an early computer machine learning. And from that, like I said, it never materialized because the machine never got made. But from that is where we get computer algorithms and where we get all of that was used. It was widely circulated, and it was she wasn't the first person to think of the idea being possible. And she wasn't the first person to toy with the idea. In fact, Charles Babbage himself had sort of written some meandering notes about how to create algorithms on paper. But she was the first person to like concretely put it on paper and have this something that could be easily reproduced by the mathematical community at the time. So that is why she is called the first computer programmer. But beyond that, it is really important to stress that, you know, not just because she was very into seeing this analytic engine vision come to fruition, but she was a visionary in the sense that she was very, very deeply interested in how individuals and people interact with technology and how technology could be used to, you know, make life better and things like that. She was the first person to envision that computer algorithms and numbers could stand for graphical images. They could stand for musical notation. They could stand for sound. And she wrote in her diaries these ideas that one day machines could reproduce images, could reproduce, you know, music. So a lot of those ideas, you know, she saw computational, you know, machine learning in the 1840s happening, you know, 160 years before they were widespread. So, I mean, somebody was bound to stumble on these ideas eventually, but the fact that she was a woman in the 1840s is remarkable. You know, it's really incredible that that her mind got there so quickly. And unfortunately, she did die very young. She was 36 years old. She died of uterine cancer. It's a freak disease that she got very, very young. So, you know, who knows what she could have accomplished had she lived longer or had better medical care. A lot of people think that the reason she didn't survive her bout with cancer, or she died quite early on with it, is because her, back then, the treatments for uterine cancer were very, very subpar to what we have today. But she did, she died at age 36. She did have a bedside confession that's secret, that nobody knows what she told her husband. That is a fun little ending fact to Ada Lovelace's story, is that she told her husband something, she whispered something in his ear, and he was so aghast at what she told him that he left her bedside and never returned to their house ever, like in his life. Nobody to this day knows what she said, but it must have been something.
Oh my God.
Wild speculation is totally encouraged.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like that.
So I wildly speculate what she could have whispered into that man's ear to make him leave immediately and never come back.
Maybe she just whispered, "Leave now and never come back."
I mean, I don't know, to just abandon the house entirely.
Yep. The whole, she died with her daughter next to her bedside. She totally, that's it. She died totally alone because
wow.
he just retreated and just deleted everything from life. I don't know.
Man, I mean, the only thing that would get me to do that is a spider, basically. Just like, burn the house down. I'm done. Moving on.
That's it. I'm secretly a spider woman.
Maybe that's what she whispered. There's a spider under my bed. And then that's it.
Nope.
She was like, well, I'm out.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it. It wasn't a scandal. Her husband was just deathly arachnophobic. And she's like, I think there was a spider on your hand. And he just left.
They were like, William, why can't you go back? And he was like, you don't understand. You don't understand. There is a spider. Well, that is the mystery of Ada Lovelace's death.
Wow.
So,
That's awesome.
yes.
So fascinating. You know that games are choose any 5 people, dead or alive, to have a dinner party with? Now Ada is definitely one of my 5. I'm like, what did you whisper? I need to know.
You can trust me.
What is this magical word?
I did want to add, thanks to Ada's work with machine learning and the computer programming work that she did, Charles Babbage did develop a second machine called the design engine. And so that actually was built way after, 100 years after. It was built in 1985. Somebody actually found his plans that were largely put together by him, but had a lot of contributions with his correspondence with Ada, and it worked. 1985, it was built. It totally worked.
Wow. Her program was proven to actually work. Yes.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the punch cards, and that reminded me of a tangential fun fact. Punch cards for computers, the idea actually came from loom cards, from weaving looms. And that was traditionally done and designed by women. So that's generations of anonymous women who were in the weaving industry for hundreds of years in Europe came up with those cards for complex patterns. And that was the idea that turned into punch cards for computers.
Awesome. That's awesome. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
And today there's a large overlap between people who work looms with punch cards and computer programmers. Lots of women do both. And non-binary people, yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of knitters who are also computer programmers. But that's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that fun fact. That
is really cool.
Adding into that.
Yeah, no, I love that marriage of art and science too. The fact that she saw so much art in her computations and her calculations, that it wasn't just cold statistics to her. Because that's definitely, that's like music. I'm a musical person, and you learn music by very structured notes and rules and everything, but that's not how you play music, obviously. There's so much heart and so much feeling into it. So yeah, I love that little anecdote about her mom being like, don't become a poet. That cracks me up. That's fantastic.
She was like, she said Lord Byron, her mother said that she told her whole life that her father had been insane. So she didn't even find out too much about her father until she was an adult. Like they had a family portrait or something like that in the house, and they didn't even like uncover it until Ada was in her 20s. Like she didn't know what her father looked like at the time. So, but I kind of think, you know, if you read a lot of what she had to say about the merit of technology and society and just the things that she envisioned for it, I think maybe, you know, the way she viewed science was not really entirely left brain. Maybe some of her father's influence seeped in there somewhere. Her mother was not entirely successful, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to have a balance of both. I mean, you definitely don't want to just go full Byron.
Right.
You know,
Never go full Byron.
That is not a topic for tonight, but yeah, no. Byron's history is fascinating and storied. But yeah, you don't want to go full Byron, but a little bit, you know, a little bit of that poetic nature is always good to have.
She called it poetical science, which I always like that.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought up that she's actually a countess, because I remember, and I never actually saw it, but I remember there was a BBC miniseries a couple years ago that was called Calculating Ada, I think, and the subtitle was the Countess of Calculations or Computation, the Countess of Computation, I think. But I loved that, like, just I never watched it just because I didn't have access to it, but at some point I planned to. But I just loved that, the Countess of Computation. I'm like, hell yeah,
Countess of Calculations. I like that.
What's that? That man with the blue box.
Yeah. Oh, that was a great episode. Yeah.
That's right.
About that. Yeah. Gotta love Doctor Who. They always weave in some interesting storylines. But that's really cool. Oh, awesome. Well, while we have a little bit of a lull, I actually have another drink recipe to share with everybody. This recipe is called the Ginger Rogers, and that's a name that a lot of people know off the top of their heads. One of the very famous quotes was that Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and wearing high heels.
That's right.
She was definitely a badass of the silver screen era, and just so many wonderful quotes. I mean, if you look up Ginger Rogers quotes online, you're going to find a plethora of just amazing little nuggets of wisdom and wit and sardonicism. But one of my favorites is when two people love each other, they don't look at each other, they look in the same direction. And that is a quote that I've always loved, and I've always thought about that. But yeah, the Ginger Rogers drink is another gin-based drink. I'm not specifically trying to do a theme here, but as you can see on the recipe card on the screen, gin, lemon juice, a little ginger syrup, and I actually made this myself. It's just a simple syrup, so you're doing equal parts sugar and water, and then adding a dash of either fresh ginger that you chop up or ginger juice, which is what I used. So usually, like if you're doing a 1/4 cup sugar and a 1/4 cup water, about a tablespoon of ginger juice will do it, or a tablespoon of fresh ginger. Some mint leaves, and then you finish it off with ginger ale. It is a very light, sparkling, fizzy drink that is a little bit spicy underneath. And I think that's perfect for Ginger Rogers. Honestly, you're getting that kick, you're getting that flair, but you're also having something that is just peppy and light and fresh and light on her feet. I mean, the woman, like, she could literally do anything that Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. And anyone who's ever worn a pair of high heels, you know what an accomplishment that is. I mean, 2 seconds in high heels as a pinup Doctor Who character, and I was ready to die. I'm like, nope, I got to change. I got to put up my flats. But yeah. So as you can see in the video, you want to muddle your mint leaves with the ginger syrup. Once you've done that, you add ice to your glass, and then you pour in your gin and your lemon juice and stir it. You want to stir it before you add the ginger ale, just because you don't want to knock out any of the effervescence. I usually stir it twice, so I'll do a good stir, add the ginger ale, and then just do a very gentle stir just to make sure everything is incorporated. And then you garnish it with a mint sprig, and you're good to go. I mean, my handy dandy little like off-site person here has made me another drink, which is trying to go with my green screen. We're just gonna ignore that. But it's a really delicious drink, and named after a really amazing woman. So yeah, if you haven't researched Ginger Rogers, do it, because she's pretty incredible. But now that
Gabby, I just want to let you know that based on your recipe, I actually made, that's what I'm having right now, is a Ginger Rogers. I would describe it like as a spicy mojito.
yeah,
That's what I'm having too.
I actually love that you have it in a copper glass, because I was thinking not mojito so much. I was thinking like a Moscow Mule, and I'm like, this is very similar, just different, gin instead of the vodka. But yeah, I don't have any
the mint is nice,
sadly, but it works in a highball glass. It's fine.
Yeah. It's really good.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's really good. But yeah, I mean, so we've discussed 4 badass women throughout history, and I know that there are tons more. Emily, who have you got for us?
Well, we have had several upstanding, contributed to society, brilliant, wonderful women who have demonstrably made the world a better place. My person is not one of them. My person primarily stabbed people, had sex, and caused trouble.
3 of my favorite things.
Yeah, and she's my favorite. Her name, well, so we don't know, a lot of what we know about her, there's conflicting accounts. We think her name was Julie Amélie de Bonny. Sorry, I have aphasia and I misplace words occasionally. She was known as La Maupin. She was born in 1673 to a secretary of the Master of Horses of Louis XIV. Her father was a single father. He had no other children, and his job was to train the pages of the king. So he trained his only daughter along with them. So she learned to sword fight, she learned to write, she learned to read, she learned literature, she learned music. She was very, very well educated for a young woman of her time. When she was about 14, we don't know the exact dates, but there's some consent issues here. She became the mistress of her father's boss, the Count d'Armagnac, who decided that he should probably marry her off to someone, quiet, timid, not going to cause trouble. So he married her off to Sieur de La Maupin, who was immediately reassigned to a taxation job in a faraway province, while Julie stayed with the Count. She grew tired of him very quickly. A master fencer in the court caught her eye, and she ran off with this penniless man to support herself doing fencing demonstrations for the public. At this point, she was mostly wearing men's clothing, but making absolutely no, she wasn't hiding that she was a woman. In fact, it was part of her thing, was that I'm a woman who can fence, to the point that she got called by one of her audience members who was like, you're not a woman. You fence way too well. So her response was to open up her shirt and be like, yeah. So that went well. So she got bored with the fencing master after a couple months, and just want to make sure I have the things right because she really has a choose your own adventure story. She got tired of the fencing master and took up singing with the Marseille Opera. And she caught the eye of a merchant's daughter there. The merchant's daughter, we don't know her name for sure, but it was probably Cecilia Bortigali. Cecilia, her family didn't like this once they became lovers, so they sent her to a nunnery. Now, what do you do when your girlfriend gets sent to a nunnery? You clearly pretend like you're going to become a nun. You sneak into the nunnery. You make liberal use of the privacy of the nunnery to spend some time with your girlfriend. Then when an older nun dies, you conspire with your girlfriend to steal her body, put her body in your girlfriend's bed, set fire to the nunnery, and escape with your girlfriend.
Obviously.
That's clearly what you do. That's,
Yeah. I mean,
that's what I would do.
Yes.
So this great love affair lasted about 3 months before Cecilia went back to her family, you know, great love affair of all time. At which point Julie is now looking at a death sentence because, well, she burnt down a convent and she absconded with a merchant's daughter. But interestingly, she was actually tried. She did not show up for the trial. She was on the run at this point, but she was tried under her husband's name because Cecilia's family would not admit that their daughter was stolen from the nunnery by another woman. At this point, Julie, newly single, dressed like a man and looking like a man apparently, is rude to a young nobleman. He challenges her to a duel. She wins very quickly. She stabs him through the shoulder. And then while he's recovering, she visits the public house he's staying at, becomes very close friends with him, helps nurse him back to health, and the most fanficky enemies to lovers trope ever becomes lovers with this gentleman. This was the Comte d'Albert. They also spent a couple months together and became lifelong friends, as well every good bisexual woman ends up with a collection. At this point, she takes up with an opera singer who he had an audition for the Paris Opera, and he was apparently a very good singer, so he was immediately accepted. His condition was that they hire her too. And she was much better than him. She's a celebrity. She had a beautiful voice. She had no training in music. She couldn't read music, but she had an absolutely gorgeous voice. So she became a very popular opera singer, spent 4 years, which was a long time for her. At this point, I think she's about 21, 22.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Spends 4 years fighting people, dueling, protecting her fellow actresses from harassing people. One man was another singer who she beat so badly with her cane that he claimed an entire group of men had ganged up on him, and she threw the snuff box, which she had stolen from him, while beating him up at his feet, and was like, it was me, not a whole group of men. At which point she then, because that's not enough trouble, dueling illegally, you know. Oh, I missed, during these 4 years, she either the Paris Opera or the Count that she was initially involved with petitioned the king for a pardon. And the king, King Louis XIV, was very, very into the arts. He was an avid ballet dancer. He loved the opera, and he found her amusing. So he pardoned her. So did this stop her behavior? Absolutely not. Her next problem was she goes to a party dressed like a man, kisses a woman on the dance floor. 3 men stand up to duel for her honor. She beats all 3 of them, is suddenly again under a death sentence. because dueling is illegal. She runs away to Brussels and takes up with a nobleman there. She then causes so much trouble for him, including fighting, biting fellow actors, stabbing herself with a real knife on stage, that he offered her 40,000 francs to leave. Which she threw at his feet, stormed off, went to Madrid, took a job as a servant for a countess. This countess hates her so much, and she hated the countess so much that when the countess was going to a ball, she dressed the countess's hair with radishes and ran away again.
That is the most unique shade I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Radishes.
Yeah. So she then goes back to France, where she's performing as La Maupin, still a very celebrated opera singer, still under a death sentence. The king's brother, who the king's brother liked to dress in women's clothes, and intervened on her behalf to get her pardoned again. She's still singing at the opera, continuing to duel, continuing to pick fights. This was when she actually bit an actor's ear on stage. And at that time, she falls in love with, not content with all of her other things, she falls in love with the most beautiful woman in Paris, who is also one of the best connected and most wealthy women in Paris, and settles down. For 2 whole years, she's actually kind of chill because, you know, the love of a good woman does that. And then her lover died of a fever. And Julie, at that point, is heartbroken and enters a nunnery for real.
No.
Now, I would think when you're joining a nunnery that the top question is, have you stolen a nun's body and burnt down a nunnery on a previous occasion? Unfortunately, the second question is, are you wealthy enough to endow this nunnery by yourself, which, thanks to her connection with this very wealthy woman, she was. So Julie died somehow in the nunnery. We don't actually know why. They think possibly a fever, possibly she was completely heartbroken over her lover's death. But yeah, she is my favorite fighty bisexual singer, artist, duelist.
That is.
Why haven't they made a series about this woman yet?
What?
Why haven't they made a series about this woman yet?
Right?
I don't know. There's actually a really good book by Kelly Gardner. It's fiction, and it's clearly fictionalized, and she actually has written about where it's fictionalized and where it isn't, which is quite entertaining to read. And I believe there's a movie in the works. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like there is.
I will go see it.
Yeah. I will dress up with her.
So like this woman, this person, this writer took this story and elaborated?
No, she just, no, you don't have to embellish it. She had to then pick which part was true.
Oh, I see. Are there zombies, werewolves?
Yeah.
Like, what did you add to that?
How do you make this wilder?
Yeah. Doctor Who? I don't know. It's too weird for Doctor Who.
See, all I can think of is like the nuns and the Sound of Music at the beginning. How do you solve a problem like someone who steals a body and burns down an entire nunnery and seduces several nuns?
There's an archive of our own for La Maupin fanfic.
Yeah.
Be right back.
I haven't done that. Now I need to.
Right? As soon as you said that, I'm just like, AO3 fan.
Yeah.
I'm just like imagining her getting to the second nunnery and being like, okay, guys, full disclosure, I actually have, how do you even know how
Yes,
did
sit
she
down
get
for
past
her
that
first
hurdle?
confession and is just like to the priest, like, how much time do you have today?
Yeah. I just wrote it all down. Here you go.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like I toured the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Virginia a couple years ago, and read a little bit about his mom, who died at 24, and that woman lived like 3 lifetimes by the time she died at 24 years old. But I was just like, oh my God, what have I done with my life?
Yeah, I should also mention La Maupin died when she was 33. So this all happened between 14 and 33.
Wow, that is a lot of debauchery. I mean,
Yeah.
adventures.
Yeah. I mean, Lord Byron got nothing on her. Like, did he burn down a nunnery? I don't think so.
She's just like, full Byron.
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh my
I can
dear.
top that.
Well, Lord Byron took notes. Like, whoa, that's a great idea.
She's like, hey, hold my beer.
Hold my exactly.
Yeah.
Hold my sword.
Yeah.
I can do you one better. That is incredible.
I think I'd read
I have a
that.
new hero. I don't know.
Well, and I think I'd read somewhere that like she was so well known for
Yeah.
her antics, even in her lifetime, that there was a fictionalized version of her
Yeah.
that was La Maupin. That was really
Yeah.
it was a fictional character that was totally based on her.
Yeah. There was also an opera about an opera singer. Yeah, she was she was the Britney Spears of her time. Like, that was, she really was. And that's one of the reasons why she got away with living under a death sentence for many years. Like, she couldn't do much. She had to be subtle in her private life at times, so she didn't get like picked up, but everyone knew who she was. It was like, I'm Julie Maupin. I am not Julie d'Aubigny. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it
Not
kind
to
of
mention
reminds
the,
it kind
not
of
to
reminds me
mention
of
the,
Calamity Jane. Calamity Jane was the same way except for her, there is a lot of debate about what is real and what is fictionalized.
Yeah. Well,
because-
there is also a lot of debate about what's real and what was fabulous, even by Julie. Like,
Right.
she thrived on these stories becoming bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
there's debate in the historical record. Like, yeah, there was arson at the nunnery. Did she do it? She didn't show up for the trial. Like, yeah.
I mean, when you date someone for 2 months, the next step is definitely steal a
Infiltrate a
body.
nunnery. Yeah.
Infiltrate a nunnery, steal a body, burn it, and escape.
Yeah. And then return your girlfriend to her family.
Yeah,
Like,
I believe that is the 2-month anniversary gift, in fact.
yeah. Yeah.
If I had a nickel, for
Right, exactly. I mean, can't even tell you how many times. Jeez.
Every Dragon Con, I do that. It's fine.
And really, that's hardly an embellishment right there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that was awesome.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I'm joking about AO3, but I'm not. I'm like fanfic.
Well-
Bob with pen.
And the fascinating thing was, I knew I wanted to talk about a duelist who was assigned female at birth, but so many of them did not clearly identify as female, and I didn't want them to be in a badass women of history. But Julie, at every point in time, was like, yeah, I'm a lady, and I dress like this, and I can kill you.
Right.
So,
I dress like this. The better to kill you, my dear.
yeah, it's easier to do this.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, identities are fluid.
Yep.
It's really, like you can identify however you want and act however you want. There's
Yep.
no box.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's cool. That's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Jean.
Oh, that's a hard act to follow. I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have bisexual dueling romances and nuns. I don't have that. I'm sorry.
I mean, everyone's awesome in their own way.
Yeah.
Not
So
to
I feel like I went from like
here, but
anti-authoritarian, and I'm gonna go like the other way with a queen.
hell yeah.
So a study in opposites, perhaps. I am by nature, an art historian, but I'm like a medievalist. So I hear badass historical women, and the first thought I had was Eleanor of Aquitaine. So like, have you guys heard it? Do you know who that is? Does it sound vaguely familiar? Okay.
I mean, I know who it is, but I definitely need to know more.
Yeah. So for anyone watching who's like, maybe that sounds vaguely familiar, if you've seen Lion in Winter with Katharine Hepburn, it's Katharine Hepburn's character.
Yeah.
So Eleanor of Aquitaine is best known for being the wife of King Henry II of England, and she lived in the 1100s. She was born in like 1122 and she lived into the early 1200s. So she was pretty much most of the 1100s. But even though that's what she's better known for, she actually was married twice. She was married to the King of France first, and was so scandalous and hard to deal with because she was too high-spirited that the King of France divorced her. Like, divorce was not a thing in the 1100s, so like she was clearly causing a ruckus. And then she moved to England, and less than, I think it was like around 6 or 8 weeks after getting her marriage to the King of France annulled, she lands in England, and when she gets there, there's this like arms race of creepy noblemen who want to try to come and kidnap her to force her to marry them, because she's an extremely powerful woman in her own right. And so she hears about this and she says no. And she sends a letter to Henry II and says, your creepy half-brother and this other nobleman are trying to come and get me, and I choose you, Pikachu. You better get your butt over here and marry me now. I mean, I might be paraphrasing there. But he does. Like, he gets this letter from this crazy countess saying, boy, you better come marry me right now. And he does. And he goes and he meets up with her and they get married, like, not quite in secret because a local bishop does it, but like real quick. No one was consulted. You know, it was just kind of like, we're getting married today. Okay, good. Let's go. And so she goes from being the Queen of France to the Queen of England in like 6 weeks. She's the only person, by the way, not just woman, but only person to rule both France and England ever.
Awesome.
That I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. There, you know, a couple kings tried later on. There was a whole big war about it, but she's the only person to ever achieve that. And one of the reasons that she was so sought after was because she actually was the independent heir to Aquitaine, which at the time, the Duchy of Aquitaine was more land than the King of France owned, and it was about the same amount of land as the King of England had. So I have a map that I hopefully can get shown at some point here. There we go. Okay, so that's France. The blue part is Aquitaine.
Oh, wow.
It's basically a third of modern day France.
Wow.
So that's why both of these kings really wanted to marry her. And it also makes it even more remarkable that she caused so much problems that the first king divorced her. And yeah, I mean, the story of like that is, it was kind of hush hush. Like she was so high spirited and like dressed so inappropriately, which I would love to know what that entailed. But she was, you know, high spirited and showed too much skin. And so the King of France divorced her. Yeah. And so then she marries the King of England, and that's just like the beginning of it. She marries the King of England, has 8 children with him. All but one lived to adulthood, which is like a crazy record for that time period. Wow. And she outlives all but 2 of her children, I think, or she outlives almost all of them because she lives to be 82. Wow. So she marries Henry II, has 8 kids with him, and then is just like, okay, I'm done here, bye, and goes back to Aquitaine to rule independently in Aquitaine. She just pieces out. She's like, I did my job. You have 8 kids. Go have fun. I'm going back over here.
Whoa.
And that's like, I think when her story gets even cooler, because she sets up for herself a legendary court at, I think it's Poitiers is the city, but it's in her duchy. And it's sometimes known as the Court of Love. And so, all those ideas like medieval courtly romances and the love poetry and all the ballads and stuff, the troubadour tradition, all those things, that starts getting popular at Eleanor's court. She makes it popular. There were those stories were floating around already, but she's the one who makes it popular and spreads it all over France and all over the rest of Europe. And it was just her court run by her and possibly a couple of the other ladies in her family. So the whole courtly romance tradition actually comes from Eleanor. She's the one responsible for that. And that was like a 12-year period or so when she was living there. Then her sons started to kick up some problems. They did not inherit her political intelligence, nor did they inherit their father's military intelligence. They're just idiots. They decided it would be a great idea to try to overthrow Henry II. And they band together and go, 3 of her sons go off and try to dethrone Henry II. 2 of her sons you've probably heard of. One's Richard the Lionheart. The other is King John I. Don't let the Robin Hood stories fool you. They were both losers. Anyway, so they get together with their older brother and decide it'll be a great idea to try to beat their dad, who's the best military power in all of Europe at this point. It does not go well. But Eleanor bands along with them and tries to use her political savvy to get support. And she actually manages to get the King of France on side and some other people. They don't win, but if she hadn't helped, it would have been way worse for everybody. She negotiated pardons with the Pope afterwards.
So I'm sorry, is that her ex that she convinced to help, or is that another King of France?
Her ex's son or brother, I don't remember. But yeah.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, no, her ex, the King of France that she was married to, was a total wuss. And I can't remember if it was one of his brothers who came along afterwards or his son, but it wasn't him. But it would have been somebody else that they would have known her pretty closely either way. But yeah, so after that failed rebellion, she gets sent to kind of house arrest for next 16 years. House arrest is her lovely castle somewhere. So, and basically Henry sends her there because he's scared of her and the political power that she can wield. She still manages to outsmart him though from house arrest and sends letters and gets support for other things to thwart him a couple times. So that whole the story of Lion in Winter is happening later on in the story about here where she's been put on house arrest. So that's about where that story comes in. But anyway, Henry dies and then Richard I becomes king. Richard spends all of his time during his rulership, off fighting crusades and getting kidnapped. And guess who rules while he's gone? His very smart mom. So she goes and runs all of the property of Aquitaine, the northern duchies of Normandy and England.
Wow.
While Richard's getting himself kidnapped somewhere in the Middle East.
Right.
And he does get himself kidnapped and has to be ransomed. And she's the one who pulls all the ransom money. It's not like in the Robin Hood stories where you see John doing it. John was kind of scheming behind the scenes and failing because Eleanor would just turn around occasionally and go, stop it. Just bad John, stay over there.
Bad. So maybe
I picture her with a rolled up newspaper, frankly.
Right.
Just no. Go back to Normandy. And so she outlives Richard. She secures the transition of power to John because 2 other people were trying to claim the throne. So she did her political wheeling and dealing to make that secure for John. And then at the age of 79, she finally, she also went on crusade twice through all of this. She didn't fight, but she did go to the Middle East and go with the Crusades. And she actually got kidnapped at one point and talked her way out of it.
Of course she did.
But I feel like someone just like, yes, we're going to be raiders and we're going to capture the ship of French noble. Oh no, it's her. No, you're good. You're good. I mean, I don't think that's actually how it happened, but that's how it's happening in my head.
I'm just picturing the 1993 Three Musketeers movie with Oliver Platt as Porthos. Like, Porthos, a pirate! Ah! Yeah, that's what I'm picturing now. It's just like, no, not Eleanor! We must jump off of the ship immediately.
Pretty much, because like her ship didn't even get taken back to port. Like, she was
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was all kind of happening in the background of John and Richard's kingships. And she does then finally at 79, I think, go into a nunnery to retire. And what, like, behind the scenes, all of her political scheming was also like marrying off all of her kids, the ones that weren't ruling, all of their kids, playing this huge like network of politics. And not just the stuff where she had to actually rule, but she was controlling politics and trying to set everyone up for success. Now, of course, the second she died, she was 82, by the way, when she died.
Wow. Yeah.
She only retired for 3 years. I think she was just like, I'm bored. But the second she died, John managed to screw everything up and lose most of her duchy.
Of course.
So yeah, her children did not get her smarts, unfortunately. So she's been the influence, aside from movies about her, she's the major influence on the character Elena Tyrell, the matriarch of the Tyrell family. And the the scheming kind of old lady matriarch character, that was Eleanor, because she was just controlling everything from behind the scenes.
I mean, who else was going to do it, frankly?
Really not her idiot sons.
Right?
Really not the idiots.
We got a kingdom to run here, guys. Like, come on. Wow.
Yeah, and a couple of the other women in her family, like a couple of her daughters, also ended up being pretty powerful rulers in the various places that they went to. Joanna of Sicily was one of her kids, and she was another one of those monarchs that, like, we don't have good records on her because it was Crusade times and a lot of stuff got destroyed. But like artistic patronage, like building castles and, a lot of that kind of courtly romance tradition of poets and songs and all that sort of stuff, like Eleanor herself and then her family were so influential in kicking off that. So like she was a political leader, mastermind, politics, and then patron of epic poetry that is, part of the huge cultural tradition of the Middle Ages, like all in one.
Yeah. There was a lot that I didn't know. That's really cool. Wow.
It's like a lot of history, sorry.
A lot of history.
Not sorry.
No, I mean, it's great. I mean, yeah, it's you get a very, very bare outlines of what royal families did in their time, whether it's in history class or, an adaptation from books or movies, and that, you never get the full picture. So there's a lot there that I didn't know. That's for sure. That's cool.
Yeah. And what I'm drinking tonight is Bordeaux, which the area that makes the wine Bordeaux is part of her duchy. So thought I'd pay a little homage to her.
Awesome.
It's not a cocktail, but close enough.
No, I mean, I love me a good glass of wine. So
They do love a good glass of wine.
Sarah gets a little sugar. Does Sarah have a story to share with us now?
I do have a little story, and you'll have to forgive me if I keep looking down because I don't remember things very well, so I have to take notes on stuff. And my lady is not a world mover and shaker or politician. She's not someone who arguably helped move forward technology, but she's very near and dear to my personal heart. She's one of the founders of Scotch distilleries, and her name is Helen Cumming.
Patron saint Helen Cumming.
So back in 1811 or so, Helen and her hubby, and I'm using it that way because we so often see, star quarterback, what's his face, and his wife. No, Helen and her hubby bought some land out in Speyside in Scotland. It was called Cardo Farm. Eventually, the name got changed to Cardhu. I probably can't pronounce Scottish things very well, but so they bought this farm because not only was it good farmland, it was really close and really easy to access, good fresh spring water, and most importantly, a peat bog, which are things you need for Scotch. You need good water and you need peat. So they set to bootlegging some Scotch. The Scotch that they first came up with from Cardo was very thick, very viscous, very peaty, very smoky. And she actually set up a bootlegging industry where she would sell it from her kitchen window to people who come by, and she'd sell them a jug and just give them a jug of Scotch, and they go wandering off. Of course, this being illegal and such, the excise guys would come by every so often to try to catch people in the act of illegally distilling the Scotch. So they would try to trick them. Now, her husband, John, did manage to get tried and convicted 3 separate times for illegal bootlegging and distribution of Scotch, even though it was widely known by pretty much everybody in the local area that she's the one doing this, operating the stills, and she's the one who's actually selling it. But he would take the bullet and go to jail so that she could keep doing it because it made more money than the farm. And what she would do to trick the excise guys is they would show up and she would hide all the still, cover all the still stuff. She would start pulling out bread that her daughter would be baking. She'd cover her hands in flour and put on an apron. Oh, you're just in time. I just pulled some bread out of the oven. Have a meal. Have you eaten yet? And she'd sit them down and she'd feed them with fresh baked bread and cheese and what have you. And while they're eating and distracted, she would go out the back and she would wave a red flag, which would warn all the other people in the area that the excise guys were in town and they could hide their stills while she kept them distracted with food and drink. Eventually, the excise guys were getting really, really insistent. They really wanted to pin some illegal bootlegging on somebody, anybody. They didn't care. They just wanted to find evidence that this stuff was happening. And so they tried to bribe her with money because they knew that she had something to do or knew something about what was going on. And so they tried to bribe her. And the first 3 times they tried to bribe her, she turned them down. I don't know nothing, go away kind of thing. But around the 4th or 5th time that they tried to bribe her, she said, yeah. As a matter of fact, I know where you can find some evidence of illegal bootlegging. I know a place. Come back next week and I'll show you and I'll take you to it. So they go away. And during the week that they're gone, she conspires with the community and fills them in on what she's got planned. And so the excise guys comes back and she takes them into the woods and takes them to this cave out not too far from her property. And inside the cave are old and broken parts of stills. The excise guys are thrilled. They give her the money. They take up all the broken pieces of stills. They're like, this is evidence that this stuff was going on, but it's broken and they won't do it again kind of thing. So she gets her money, they get broken bits, and she distributes the money to her neighbors so everybody can buy new parts for their stills and have more production of Scotch.
Free upgrades.
Basically, yeah. So in 1823 was the Excise Act of 1823 made it viable for people like Helen Cumming to actually legally distill and sell Scotch. So they were the Cardo farm with the Cummings were among the first people to get their license to do so. And they started collaborating and talking in parts with other distillers from other areas. One of which was she got friendly with was a gentleman named George Smith, who was the founder of Glenlivet Scotch. And she and Smith got to be friends, and he enjoyed her stuff, although found it too peaty for his taste, but thought it would make a great blending Scotch for his product. So he started buying blending Scotch off of her to blend in with Glenlivet. mind you, the local community where she was from is like, I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't smoky. This is perfect. Speyside, by the way, is known for being a fairly peaty Scotch.
It's one of my favorites for exactly that reason.
Yeah. So after a bit, even during all this, she's still selling Scotch out of her window. Excuse me, I have to pet the cat so he'll put her down. He picks her up and she doesn't get to get put down until I scratch her belly. Thank you, Vinny.
I mean, we have to have a good couple of cat photo bombs and stuff.
Absolutely.
So I think we're doing well. Yeah.
So John and Helen Cumming had several children. The eldest son was named John, and he married a woman named Elizabeth. Or she had a daughter named Elizabeth. I wasn't entirely sure where this Elizabeth fit in exactly, whether she was a daughter-in-law or actually a daughter. I've seen records and articles that go either way with this. But Elizabeth lived on until her late 60s. And she kept her fingers involved with all of this on. But Elizabeth Cumming, in the 1890s, registered Cardo Farm and changed the name to Cardew. And ultimately, the day-to-day operations of the distillery went from Helen to their son John, with Elizabeth basically helping with a lot of the stuff. And it was about this point that they started talking to some individuals from the John Walker and Sons Distilling Company. Now they know them as Johnny Walker. And they decided, much like Glenlivet had, that this Scotch was perfect for blending with their product. Their son, they had another son named Lewis, who went on to be a bigwig in the wine and spirits industry, with being one of the ones who helped certify things and decided what could be sold when and where. And he hated their family product. He said it was too thick, it was too smoky, and it could only be good for blending with other Scotches, which is ultimately what they mostly did. So eventually John died, and Elizabeth, either the sister or wife, depending on whose records you read, took over the daily running of the distillery while raising two kids, having 3 days after her husband or brother died, lost a child, and then also got pregnant again shortly after, not sure from where, but anyway, she was pregnant and raising two kids and running a distillery. And then that's where Glenfiddich enters. So Elizabeth and Helen, when Helen was still alive, Glenfiddich came along, and they spoke with Glenfiddich about what to do with the Scotch thing. And Glenfiddich also bought blending Scotch from them. And eventually they set it up so the next generation of John was able, they got in their deal, they also managed to talk them into giving the Cummings 100 shares in Glenfiddich, as well as a seat on the board for the surviving John Cummings. And then Helen, had retired and eventually passed away, and Elizabeth eventually, and Cardew, I believe, is still actually produced, but it's not something you can get outside of Scotland if it is still produced. It's still a very small batch thing. So while she didn't necessarily change the world in a huge dynamic way, I think she had a pretty big impact, at least in a very viable and lucrative industry.
And a delicious industry at that.
Very delicious
Industries, I have a cocktail for you.
Heck yeah.
I'm going to make right now. Now, often I would use an original cocktail to do. This time, I wanted to do a Scotch cocktail. It's not one I've got any really great original recipes for. I have a couple that are in the works, but nothing that I was ready to share yet. So I'm going with a very classic cocktail. It's called the Rob Roy. And the Rob Roy is essentially a Manhattan. There are some that say it predates the Manhattan, that this was something that was being made with Scotch. And I mean, the recipe is pretty much the same. A couple ounces of Scotch, some sweet vermouth, and some bitters. Garnished usually with a brandied cherry, which I do not have brandied cherries because I ate them all.
No shame. I've done the same thing.
They were getting old. There's some that say that the Rob Roy came first, and there's others that say the Manhattan came first. But as with any kind of cocktail within this industry, ask a bartender how the origin story of a cocktail, you're going to get 10 different answers. ask 2 bartenders, you're going to get 20 different answers, and so on and so forth. So, Rob Roy, we start with, and I don't have any Johnny Walker or anything else. I have this blended scotch called Monkey Shoulder. It's a very tasty, it's my favorite blended scotch. It's super tasty, super yummy. And I'm going to do 2 ounces here in my jigger. I'm going slow because I don't want to spill.
Gabby, I love your face of just like happiness of watching scotch.
This is about half full with ice. I'm going to pour that in there. All right. Now, the recipe tradition calls for sweet vermouth. I'm doing something a little different with this because I'm Calamity Dawn and that's what I do. This is my homemade vermouth. What this is I took blueberries and lemon zest, macerated it with brown sugar, honey, and cognac, strained out the syrup, and added that syrup to 20-year-old tawny port. And then let it age for a little bit before I started using it. And so that's what I'm using as a vermouth supplement.
Wow.
That sounds amazing.
Calamity,
Oh
I miss
God.
you so much.
Yeah, like my heart is all flutter.
I'm going to, because I love this, I'm actually going to do a full ounce of that. A lot of times when I make my traditional Manhattans, I go very light on the vermouth and go heavier on the rye or the whiskey. This is so good, I'm going a little bit heavier on it. It's a little more viscous than your standard vermouth, but who cares? And this is some of my very last batch of my, I call these the ABC bitters. Because I had a friend who idolizes Alton Brown, and when she went to meet him, she wanted to take him presents. So I made her bitters to give to him for his Manhattans. And that's why they're called the ABCs, or the Alton Brown bitters. And the C is for cinnamon, because there's a ton of cinnamon in this. One of my friends calls it the Christmas bitters. And I'm going to add this cinnamon and cardamom bitter. I'm going to do 4 dashes of that. And this should taste like a Scotch cobbler. Take a handy dandy bar spoon. I'm gonna give it a stir. When stirring your cocktail, you do not want to hear, you don't want to hear the ice clinking around. You just kind of want to hear the swirl of the back of the spoon on the sides of the shaker tin. Because you don't want to break up the ice and get little ice chips, and you just want to dilute the cocktail. And then handy dandy strainer. Typically this would be served in a coup or a cocktail glass. I don't feel like, I just felt like using my pretty rocks glass. I didn't want to have a coup or a martini glass next to the computer because they are a little more unstable. Yeah. And so, like I said, normally I would garnish this with either brandy cherry or possibly an orange twist. But in lieu of that, I'm just going to drink it as it is. Cheers.
Awesome. Salud.
Cheers.
That looks
You don't have to take my word for this, but this is freaking amazing.
I'm really drooling. I am drooling.
I know.
I want one.
This is why you got to come, when cons get back online, you got to come to my con so I can do this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I've been to one of Calamity Dawn's panels at a steampunk convention, and legit, if you've never been, she is amazing. So you definitely need to check out Calamity Labs. She's Calamity Dawn, Sara Camarata. She's amazing. So yeah,
and
look her up.
assuming I may be going to the symposium this year. I'm not sure what the status of that is.
Yeah.
But I will be going to TeslaCon in November.
Yes.
And I'm doing a panel there called "We Do the Weird Stuff."
Hell yeah.
Which is where I've mentioned this to several people before. I dig up really unusual cocktail ideas, and I make them. And I usually try them because I'm not going to make anybody drink something that I won't try myself. If a cocktail looks too weird for me to drink, nobody should drink it. Although I have drawn the line, there's one weird cocktail I will never make, and that would be the smoker's cough. It's Jägermeister and mayonnaise.
Nope. Yep. That's right out.
Nope.
Not doing it.
Oh,
Nope.
No.
I was already out at Jaeger.
Unless somebody were to pay me, then I might consider doing it for money.
no.
Nothing less than a couple of hundred, though.
Okay.
I would make that for someone
Maybe
I
like
hate.
250 or higher, I might consider doing it.
I don't think I could even look at that. Like,
No?
Oh no, it's a hideous looking cocktail.
Woof. Well, I would much rather have your version of the raw boy because that sounded amazing.
And it is delicious.
I cannot wait for physical conventions again so that I can taste your amazing aged contraptions that you have going on. I mean, that, just, you had me at blueberries and then you just expounded upon it. And I'm done. I'm checked out. Like, I love scotch and that sounds amazing. So.
I can send you the recipe for my vermouth if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely do. And
please send me the recipe too.
Sure thing.
I'll be nice.
Yeah, and we'll put a little recipe card up on the video too, hopefully around here, so that y'all can see how to make a raw boy at home. But thank you so much. That was awesome. I know that I personally am a big Scotch fan, so hearing a little bit of the history behind Helen and the family was awesome. And just seeing you mix is always a pleasure. So
It is fun. I still intend on getting my videos up some and running someday. When I finish moving and doing weird things to the basement.
right, getting that studio set up, right?
Yeah, basically.
I'm like so excited because like I have a lot of Scottish family and I love Scotch. So like hearing that like the industry of Scotch had a lot to do with a lot of badass like bootlegging ladies. That is so cool.
The history of Scotch, the history of gin in England is also really fascinating. I didn't find too many real badass women associated with the history of gin in England, which is why I didn't do that. But if we ever do just like the history of spirits and alcohol industry, I got some stories about Mother's Ruin for you.
Amazing. That sounds fascinating. Like, I definitely want to hear more about that.
That's what they used to call gin in some points, was Mother's Ruin.
Wow. We've already hit our time limit for tonight. I mean, it was really easy to do because everybody had such amazing stories to tell. And I definitely learned some new stuff. I had some amazing cocktails. I'm definitely going to try that Scotch cocktail as soon as I can. And I just want to thank you guys again for joining us despite distance and some technical difficulties and some feline furry interlopers onto the feeds. You know, it means a lot to us that you guys took the time out to come chat with us about badass women throughout history, and that you at home watching took some time out to listen to our stories. So we hope that you enjoy some of these cocktails at home, and definitely look up some of these ladies that we talked about tonight and learn a little bit more, because there's truly a lot more to learn. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe us on YouTube and on Facebook. We're doing Steampunk Atlantis online, and our physical convention will be moved to 2022, February 11th through the 13th. It'll still be the theme Steampunk Atlantis. So please join us, hang out with us, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.